People think I became a writer because I loved words. They're only half right. I became a writer because I slowly ran out of people who would listen to them. Whenever someone asks me where my first story came from, I don't think about the day my first book was published. I don't think about the awards or the interviews. I think about a little blue notebook because that's where my voice survived when I thought I had lost it forever. I wasn't born quiet. In fact, I was the exact opposite. When I was 5 years old, I talked so much that my parents joked I could have conversations with the clouds. I asked questions about everything. Why do birds fly in a V? Where does the moon go during the day? Can trees feel lonely? If rain had a favorite song, what would it sound like? My parents laughed. Sometimes they answered. Sometimes they made up funny answers just to make me laugh. Back then, I believed every story deserved to be told, even the silly ones, especially the silly ones. One rainy afternoon, my grandmother came to visit. Before she left, she handed me a small blue notebook tied with a white ribbon. "For my little storyteller," she said. I carefully untied the ribbon. The pages were completely blank. Grandma smiled. "They're waiting for you." That night, I sat on the floor beside my bed with a purple crayon. On the very first page, I wrote, in the messiest handwriting imaginable, "When I grow up, I want the whole world to read my stories." I stared at those words for a long time. Then I hugged the notebook against my chest. It felt less like paper and more like a promise. As I got older, life became busier. Dad started working longer hours. Mom was always trying to keep everything together. Bills, groceries, laundry, appointments. I never doubted they loved me. I still don't. But love and time aren't always the same thing. One evening, I ran into the living room holding my blue notebook. "Dad, I finished a new story." He smiled without looking away from his laptop. "That's amazing, sweetheart. Leave it here. I'll read it tonight." I placed the notebook beside him. I was so excited that I could barely sleep. The next morning, the notebook was exactly where I had left it, closed, untouched. I told myself he must have forgotten. Adults forget things. It's normal, so I picked it up and smiled anyway. "It's okay," I whispered. "I'll write another one." A week later, I tried again. "Mom, can I read you my new story?" She was stirring soup on the stove. "Can you give me 5 minutes?" Of course. 5 minutes became dinner. Dinner became dishes. Dishes became bedtime. The story stayed inside my notebook, unread. Again, neither of my parents meant to hurt me. That's what made it so confusing, because children don't always understand intentions. They understand moments, and little by little, those moments started teaching me something. Maybe my stories weren't as important as I thought. Family gatherings became harder. The adults sat around the dining table talking and laughing. I wanted to tell everyone about the adventure I'd written that morning. I waited patiently. When there was finally a quiet moment, I smiled. "I wrote a story about Ava." An aunt interrupted gently. "Let Uncle finish first." I nodded. A few minutes later, I tried again. "This girl in my story finds a sweetheart." My mother smiled. "Don't interrupt." So I waited and waited. By the time the conversation ended, everyone stood up. Nobody ever asked what my story was about. That night, I opened my notebook for the first time. I didn't write a story, I wrote a question. Why is it easier for everyone to talk than it is for me? I was only 8 years old. I didn't know it then. But that was the first day I questioned whether my voice mattered. School wasn't any easier. On the first day of 4th grade, our teacher asked everyone to share their dream. Hands shot into the air. "I want to be a doctor. I want to be an astronaut. I want to be a pilot." Then she looked at me. "Ava, what do you want to be?" My cheeks turned pink. I smiled. "I want to write books." The room went quiet. For 1 second, I thought everyone was listening. Then a boy near the back laughed. "Who even reads books anymore?" Another student grinned. "So you're going to be poor?" A few more students laughed. Even the teacher smiled awkwardly before saying, "Well, that's certainly different." Different. I hated that word. Because children don't hear words the way adults do. Adults hear *unique. Children hear strange. When I got home, I picked up my blue notebook. On the front cover I had written, "Future best-selling author." I stared at those words for almost a minute. Then, I erased them. No one asked me to. I did it myself, sometimes. The deepest wounds aren't the ones other people give us. They're the ones we quietly give ourselves. The teasing became worse as the years passed. If I answered a question in class, someone copied the way I spoke. If I stayed quiet, someone asked if I knew how to talk. It didn't matter what I did, I was always wrong. So I made a decision, a simple one. If speaking always ended badly, maybe I should speak less. Every week, I became a little quieter, not all at once, just enough that nobody noticed, except one person, me. One afternoon, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror at school. I looked at my reflection and whispered, "When did you stop smiling so much?" There was no answer, just a quiet girl. Looking back at me, that night I opened my blue notebook again. The page was blank, the room was silent. Outside, rain tapped softly against the window. Inside, the only sound was my pen moving across the paper. Something strange happened. As I wrote, I could breathe again. The words didn't interrupt me. The paper didn't laugh. The pages never told me to hurry. For the first time in a long time, I felt heard. From that night on, whenever the world became too loud, I escaped into my notebook. It became more than paper. It became the only place where I never had to apologize for being myself. I didn't know it yet, but those handwritten stories were about to open a door that would change my life forever. By the time I was 15, most people at school knew me. Almost nobody knew me asterisk. Teachers described me with the same 3 words every year. Quiet, polite, well-behaved. They always sounded like compliments, but to me, they felt like proof that I had become invisible. No one ever wrote, "She tells beautiful stories," or "She has the biggest imagination in class." Those parts of me stayed hidden inside one place, my blue notebook. Every night followed the same routine. I'd wait until the house became quiet. Dad would switch off the television. Mom would close the kitchen window. The hallway light would disappear beneath my bedroom door. Only then, I'd reach under my mattress. The blue notebook was always there, waiting for me. Some people prayed before sleeping. Some listened to music, I wrote. The moment my pen touched the paper, it felt like opening a window after sitting in a locked room all day. In real life, I barely spoke. Inside my notebook, I couldn't stop. I wrote about girls who climbed mountains even though they were afraid of heights. About old men who secretly planted flowers in empty streets. About lonely stars that kept shining. Even when no one looked up, without realizing it, I was writing about myself. There were nights when I laughed while writing. There were nights when tears landed on the pages before the ink had dried. Sometimes I'd finish a story at 2 in the morning, close the notebook, hug it against my chest, and whisper, "At least you understand." It sounds strange now, talking to a notebook, but when you're lonely long enough, even blank pages can start feeling like friends. One Saturday afternoon, it rained so heavily that the electricity went out. The whole house became dark. Dad sighed. "No internet," Mom laughed. "I guess we'll have to survive." I quietly walked to my bedroom, opened the curtains, sat beside the window. The rain raced down the glass. I rested my notebook on my knees, outside. The world sounded loud. Inside, my pen moved softly across the paper. I remember thinking, if peace had a sound, it would be rain and pages turning, years later. People asked me where I found ideas for my books. The truth, most of them were born beside that window, with rain outside and silence inside. Monday morning arrived, English class, Mrs. Collins walked in carrying a stack of papers. "I have an assignment for everyone." A chorus of groans filled the room. She smiled. "I promise it's not difficult." Then she wrote 6 words on the board. "Where do you feel most alive?" The classroom became quiet. 1,000 words. No right answer. Just be honest. Pens began moving. Some students wrote about football. Some wrote about music. Someone even wrote about pizza. I stared at my blank page. Then, without thinking, I began writing. The only place I feel alive is inside a story, because stories never interrupt me. Stories never laugh before I finish a sentence. Stories wait patiently, as if every word I have matters. When the bell rang, everyone rushed out except me. I was still writing. Mrs. Collins quietly walked over. "You can finish tomorrow," I nodded, but before closing my notebook, she glanced at the last page. Only for a second. Then she looked at me differently. Not with pity, not with surprise, recognition, as if she'd just discovered something hidden beneath years of silence. The next afternoon, the classroom was empty when she called my name. "Ava, could you stay for a moment?" My stomach tightened. Had I broken a rule, forgotten homework? She held my assignment in both hands. There were no red corrections, only tiny notes written in blue ink. Beautiful image. I felt this. "Tell me more here." No teacher had ever responded to my writing like that. They usually corrected grammar. She had listened to my heart. Mrs. Collins smiled gently. "Can I ask you something?" I nodded. "How long have you been writing?" I looked down. "I don't know, since I was little." "Does anyone read your stories?" I laughed quietly. "No." "Why not?" "Because they might not like them, because they might laugh. Because they might confirm every fear I'd carried for years. Instead, I simply shrugged. I just write for myself." She was silent for a moment. Then she asked the question that changed my life. "Would you bring one tomorrow?" My eyes widened. "My stories?" She nodded. "Only if you want to. No pressure." My heart immediately answered no, but something much smaller. A voice I hadn't heard in years, whispered maybe. That night, I stood in front of the box beneath my bed. Inside were years of notebooks, dozens of stories, some unfinished. Some terrible, some that still made me cry. I picked one up, then put it back, picked another, put it back for nearly an hour. I couldn't choose, not because I didn't trust my stories. Because handing someone my notebook felt like handing them my heart. Eventually, I chose one. It was called The Girl Who Collected Broken Feathers. I slipped it into my school bag. Then barely slept all night. The next morning, I almost turned around 3 different times on the way to school. I nearly took the notebook back out of my bag before English class started. When the bell rang, I walked to Mrs. Collins' desk. Without saying a word, I placed the notebook in front of her. She looked at it, then at me. "I'll take good care of it," for some reason. Those 6 words made it easier to let go. As I walked back to my seat, my hands were shaking, not because I'd handed over a notebook, because for the first time in years, I had allowed someone to hear my voice. I had no idea that one story hidden inside a blue notebook was about to open a door I never thought someone like me could walk through. The next morning, I couldn't focus on anything. Not math, not science, not lunch, not even the rain tapping against the classroom windows. My notebook wasn't in my school bag anymore. It was on Mrs. Collins' desk being read. The thought made my stomach twist. What if she hated it? What if she thought it was childish? What if she realized everyone else had been right? For the first time in years, I wished I had never let anyone read my words. That afternoon, Mrs. Collins asked me to stay after class again. She was standing by the window with my blue notebook in her hands. She didn't speak immediately. She simply looked at the cover, the one where the words "future best-selling author" had once been. The marks from where I had erased them were still faintly visible. She gently ran her fingers across them. "You erased something here." I looked away. "It doesn't matter." She smiled sadly. "I think it does." A long silence filled the room. Then she opened the notebook. I read every story. I stopped breathing. "They're not perfect." My heart sank. Then she continued. "They're honest, and honesty is much harder to teach than grammar." Tears filled my eyes before I even realized it. Nobody had ever spoken about my writing like that. Not because she thought it was amazing, because she understood why I wrote. She closed the notebook carefully. "Ava, have you ever heard of the National Young Writers Scholarship?" I slowly shook my head. "It's for students who have something important to say. I think you should apply." I laughed. A nervous, tiny laugh. "I don't think they want someone like me." She tilted her head. "What does someone like you look like?" I didn't answer because I didn't know. I only knew the version of myself that fear had created. Mrs. Collins slid a blue folder across the desk. "Take it home. You don't have to decide today." As I picked it up, my hands were shaking, not because it was heavy, because dreams always are. For the next 2 weeks, my bedroom light stayed on long after midnight. The scholarship required one original story. No word limit, no theme, just tell a story that matters. I started over 12 times. Every version felt wrong. Too sad, too simple, too boring, too much like me. One night, I became so frustrated that I ripped every page out of my notebook. The torn papers covered my bedroom floor like fallen leaves. I sat in the middle of them, crying. Then I noticed the very first page of my notebook, Grandma's handwriting. "For my little storyteller." I picked it up, smoothed the wrinkles with my hand, and whispered, "I'm sorry." Not to Grandma, to the little girl who had once believed writing was enough. I gathered every torn page, taped them back together, one by one. Some of the pages still carry those tape marks today. Whenever readers ask why I never replaced that old notebook, I smile, because healing leaves marks too. 3 days before the deadline, I stopped trying to write something impressive. Instead, I wrote something true. A story about a little girl who slowly stopped speaking because she thought silence made people happier. When I finished, I didn't feel proud, I felt lighter, as if I had finally said something I'd been carrying for years. Mrs. Collins mailed it the next morning. Before sealing the envelope, she looked at me. No matter what happens, I'm proud of you for letting the world hear your voice. Those words stayed with me. A month later, an envelope arrived at school. Mrs. Collins walked into class smiling. Ava, could you come here? My legs felt weak. She handed me the envelope. I opened it carefully. My eyes raced across the page, then stopped. Congratulations? I couldn't read the rest. Everything became blurry. Mrs. Collins laughed softly. You made it. You've been selected as one of the 10 national finalists. The classroom burst into applause. Someone actually cheered. For a moment, I forgot what it felt like to be invisible. When I looked out the classroom window, I imagined Grandma smiling somewhere. Maybe, just maybe, the little girl with the blue notebook hadn't been foolish after all. The interview was scheduled for Saturday. For the first time in years, my parents looked happier than I had ever seen them. Dad took the day off work. Mom ironed my favorite blue dress, the same color as my notebook. You'll do great, Dad said. I smiled. I wanted to believe him. I really did. The conference center was beautiful, tall glass windows, books everywhere. Students laughing together, parents taking pictures. Everyone looked like they belonged there. Everyone, except me. The old voice inside my head returned. You're in the wrong place. Someone made a mistake. They're all real writers. You're just pretending. I held my blue notebook tighter, as if it could protect me. A volunteer called my name. Candidate number 7. My heart began pounding. I stood, walked toward the interview room. Every step felt heavier than the last, at the end of the hallway. There was a wooden door, simple, ordinary, yet somehow, it looked impossible to open. Behind it, people would ask me about my stories, about my dreams, about me. The very things I'd spent years trying to hide. I reached for the handle, then I heard laughter from inside. Not cruel laughter, just confident laughter. The kind of laughter from people who weren't afraid to be seen. Suddenly, every voice from my childhood came rushing back. Don't interrupt, that's different. Who even reads books? She's so quiet. The hallway disappeared. I wasn't 15 anymore. I was 8, holding a story nobody had time to hear. My hand slipped away from the handle. I couldn't breathe. A volunteer looked at me. Are you all right? I nodded. It was the biggest lie I'd ever told. Then, I turned around. I walked past the waiting room, past the bookshelves, past my parents who smiled because they thought I was just nervous. I pushed open the front doors and stepped outside. It was raining. The same soft rain that had always comforted me. But this time, it couldn't. I sat alone on a bench across the street. The blue notebook rested on my lap for nearly an hour. I stared at the interview badge hanging around my neck. Then I slowly took it off, folded it, placed it inside the notebook, and whispered, I'm sorry, not because I had lost. Because I had abandoned the little girl, who once believed her stories deserved to be heard. That afternoon, candidate number 7 never walked through the door, and for the next 6 months, neither did I for 187 days. I didn't write a single word. I know the exact number, because I counted. Writers don't just miss writing. They miss the person they become when they write. Every night, I'd take the blue notebook out from under my bed, open it, stare at the blank page, then close it again. Sometimes I'd write one sentence, then tear the page out. Sometimes I'd write my name and stop there. The notebook that had once felt like home now reminded me of the door I never opened. Winter slowly became spring. The maple tree behind the school library began growing leaves again. Everything around me seemed to move forward. Except me, I still ate lunch alone beneath that tree. Still walked through the hallways with my eyes on the floor. Still answered every question with, I'm fine. The strange thing about pretending you're okay is that eventually everyone believes you, including yourself. One afternoon, I came home and found my bedroom door slightly open. Dad was sitting on the floor. The cardboard box of my old notebooks was beside him. For a second, I panicked. Those notebooks weren't just stories. They were every version of me I'd been too afraid to show the world. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I was looking for an extension cord. I knocked the box over. He held up the oldest notebook, the little blue one. The ribbon Grandma had tied around it years ago was faded now. He opened the first page. I froze. There it was, written in purple crayon. When I grow up, I want the whole world to read my stories. Dad smiled. Then the smile disappeared. He looked at the page for a long time. Mom quietly walked into the room. What happened? Without speaking, Dad handed her the notebook. She read the first page, her eyes filled with tears. Then Dad whispered, "Do you remember how much she used to talk?" Mom gave a tiny smile. She never stopped having things to say. A long silence, then. We just stopped listening. I had imagined hearing those words for years. I thought they would make me angry. Instead, they broke my heart. Not because they admitted their mistake. Because I could hear how much they wished they could change it. Dad looked at me. "I'm sorry. I thought I was teaching you to be polite. I didn't know I was teaching you to stay quiet." For the first time in my life, I believed him, not because he had the perfect apology. Because he finally understood. That night, I didn't write, but for the first time in months, I slept peacefully. A few weeks later, a new student joined our class. Her name was Lily. She arrived halfway through the school year. While everyone else chatted with their friends, she stood alone near the classroom door, holding a notebook against her chest. It reminded me of someone, me, at lunch. I saw her wandering around the cafeteria with her tray, looking for somewhere to sit. No one looked up, no one noticed. I remembered exactly how that felt. Without saying a word, I picked up my tray, walked outside, and sat beneath the maple tree. A few seconds later, I looked up and asked, "Do you want to sit here?" She smiled with visible relief. "I'd like that." We ate almost the entire lunch in silence. Strangely, it wasn't awkward, it felt peaceful, just before the bell rang. She looked at me and whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" "For making today hurt a little less." Those 7 words stayed with me all afternoon. Sometimes the smallest kindness changes the hardest day. Over the next few weeks, Lily became my only friend. She loved books. She loved rainy days. She loved writing. One afternoon, we were studying beneath the maple tree when a gust of wind scattered the papers from my bag. Before I could stop her, Lily picked one up. It wasn't homework. It was one of my unfinished stories. She read the first few lines, then looked at me. "You wrote this?" My face burned. "It's not finished. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have left it there." She didn't laugh. She didn't hand it back immediately. She simply kept reading. When she reached the end of the page, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I've never read anything like this." I shook my head. "It's just something I wrote a long time ago." She held the page carefully. "No, it feels like someone understood things I couldn't explain." I stared at her. That single sentence did something no award ever could. It reminded me why I started writing. Not to impress people, to help them feel less alone. Over the next month, Lily kept asking if I'd written anything new. I always gave the same answer. "No." One afternoon she asked, "Why did you stop?" I looked away. "I don't know." She smiled gently. "I think you do." I stayed silent. She hugged her notebook a little tighter. Then she said something so quietly, I almost didn't hear it. "I'm scared too." I looked at her. "Every time I write, I think people will laugh. I almost throw my notebook away every week." She laughed softly through watery eyes. "But then I remember something." "What?" "If one story of yours made me feel this understood, maybe mine can make one person feel understood too." For the first time in 187 days, I went home, opened my blue notebook, picked up my pen, and wrote one sentence. "Today someone reminded me why stories exist." The words came slowly, then another sentence, then another. I wrote until sunrise, not because the fear had disappeared. It hadn't, but because something had finally become stronger than my fear. Hope. I didn't know it yet. But soon Lily would find herself standing in front of a familiar wooden door. And this time, I refused to let someone else walk away from it alone. A month later, Mrs. Collins walked into our classroom carrying a familiar blue folder. The moment I saw it, my heart skipped. Not because I wanted another chance, because I knew exactly what it meant. She smiled. "Lily, could you come here?" Lily slowly stood. Her hands were already shaking. Mrs. Collins handed her the folder. "I've read your stories. I think the world should read them too." Lily looked completely frozen, just like I had. The following weeks felt strangely familiar, every afternoon. We sat beneath the maple tree. She practiced answering interview questions, then she'd stop halfway through and laugh nervously. "I sound ridiculous." "You sound honest," I replied. "What if honest isn't enough?" I smiled. "It was enough to make me cry." She looked down. "You're only saying that because we're friends." I shook my head. "No, I'm saying it because your story made me forget I was reading. That's what good stories do." She smiled. It was small, but real. Interview day arrived, the same conference center. The same hallway, the same wooden door. It looked exactly the way I remembered, only this time, I wasn't afraid of the door, I was afraid of history repeating itself. The volunteer smiled. Candidate number 9, Lily stood. She took one step, then another, then she stopped. Her breathing became uneven. I can't. She turned toward me. Her eyes were full of panic. I can't do this. She started walking away, exactly the way I had without thinking. I reached for her hand. She looked at me. I'll fail, maybe. They'll think I'm stupid. Maybe not. What if I forget everything? I smiled gently. Then tell them the truth, she frowned. What truth? That you're nervous. She stared at me. You can say that? I laughed softly. You're a writer. The truth is the one thing you're already good at. She looked at the door again. Then back at me. I don't want to walk in alone. I squeezed her hand. You won't. We walked together slowly. Until we reached the door, I stopped. This is as far as I can go, she nodded. Took a deep breath, then opened the door before disappearing inside. She turned around, not because she was scared anymore, because she wanted to smile. And this time, someone smiled back. I waited outside for almost an hour. When the door finally opened, Lily ran toward me. She wasn't crying, she was laughing. I did it. Not, I won. Not, I was perfect. Just, I did it, and somehow, those 3 words healed something inside me. 4 years later, I received an email while sitting beneath the same maple tree. It was from a publishing house. They wanted to publish my novel. I read the email once, then twice, then 10 more times. I kept waiting for it to disappear. It didn't. I looked up at the tree. The same tree where I'd eaten lunch alone. The same tree where I met Lily. The same tree where I started writing again. Some places don't just hold memories. They hold the people we used to be. The day my first book was released, I carried something with me. Not my phone, not my notes, the little blue notebook. Its corners were worn. The pages had turned yellow. Tape still held some of them together. It looked nothing like the beautiful notebooks sold in bookstores, but it had carried me through every chapter of my life. It deserved to be there. The bookstore was full. Readers stood in line with copies of my novel. Some wanted signatures, some wanted photographs, some simply wanted to say, "Thank you," near the end of the event. I noticed my parents standing quietly at the back. Dad was holding my blue notebook. He'd brought it without telling me. After everyone had left, he walked over. He opened the first page. The words were still there. When I grow up, I want the whole world to read my stories. He smiled through tears. You really did it. I looked at the notebook, then at him. I almost didn't. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, Dad took a slow breath. Do you remember how I always told you not to interrupt? I nodded. I thought I was teaching you manners. His voice cracked. I didn't realize. I was teaching you to hide. Tears filled my eyes. He looked away. I wish I'd listened more. I gently took his hand. You listened when it mattered. He shook his head. No, you found your voice. I was just lucky enough to hear it before it was too late. We hugged each other. Neither of us said another word. None were needed. As I left the bookstore, I walked through the small park across the street. Beneath a maple tree sat a little girl. She couldn't have been older than 8. A notebook rested on her knees. She kept looking around. As if she was waiting for someone, I smiled. Can I sit here? She nodded. For a while, we said nothing. Then she looked at me. Do you want to hear my story? I smiled, more than anything. She began reading. She stumbled over a few words, started one sentence again, forgot another, then looked at me nervously. I'm not very good. I shook my head. No, you're just getting started. She smiled, then continued reading, this time, without stopping. I listened to every single word, not because it was perfect, because she deserved to be heard. As she read, I looked down at the old blue notebook resting in my hands, then back at hers. For the first time, I understood something. The greatest story I would ever write wasn't the one people bought in bookstores. It was the life I almost never lived. Because one teacher believed in a quiet girl, because one friend reminded her why stories mattered. Because 2 parents learned that listening is another way of saying, I love you, and because one little girl finally understood that her voice had always mattered.